You know, folks, I want to talk to you about something that happened yesterday. And I want you to really sit with it for a moment before we get into all the noise and the spin and the back and forth. Because something happened in this country on March 28th, 2026, that I believe historians are going to be writing about for a very long time. An estimated 9 million Americans, 9 million, stood up, walked out of their homes, and gathered in more than 3,000 events across all 50 states, not just New York, not just Los Angeles, in small towns in Idaho, in rural Wyoming, in Utah and South Dakota, and deep red counties where people don't normally show up for things like this. 9 million people peacefully in one single day. That is the largest single-day protest in the history of the United States of America. Now look, I've been in public life for a long time. I've seen protests from inside the Oval Office, and I've seen them from the outside. I've seen people march for things I agreed with and things I didn't. And let me tell you something. The size alone isn't what stopped me. It's what it tells us. When that many of your fellow citizens feel compelled to leave their daily lives and stand in a public square, something deeper is happening in the country. Something that goes beyond one party, one president, one policy. And here's what I think most people don't fully understand yet. The reasons behind this, the chain of events that brought us to this moment, and what it means for where we're headed. That's where things start to get complicated. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But first, I need you to understand the weight of what we're looking at. Because this isn't just a protest story. This is a democracy story. And whether you were out there marching or whether you were sitting at home, disagreeing with every word on every sign, this moment belongs to all of us, and it demands our attention. Now, to understand what happened yesterday, you've got to understand how we got here, because this didn't come out of nowhere. Movements like this never do. They build, they accumulate. And if you're paying attention, you can see each step along the way. It started on June 14th, 2025, the first No Kings protest. Millions of people in the streets, organized by Indivisible and the 50501 Coalition. On the same day as the Army's 250th anniversary parade and the President's 79th birthday. That was the first signal. Then came October 18th, No Kings 2, even bigger, roughly 5 million people, about 2,600 events. The AFL-CIO joined. Third Act brought out Americans over 60. Democrats abroad organized rallies across Europe. Each time, the movement got wider. But then, and this is where you have to pay very close attention, the ground shifted. In January 2026, federal immigration agents shot and killed Renee Good and Alex Preddy in Minneapolis. 2 Americans, 37 years old. Then Keith Porter in Los Angeles. American citizens killed in encounters with their own government. A general strike shut down Minneapolis on January 23rd. A larger strike swept the country a week later. And before the country could even process that grief, on February 28th, the United States and Israel launched a surprise bombing campaign against Iran. Operation Epic Fury, during nuclear negotiations. Over 1,000 targets hit in 24 hours. The administration's stated reasons shifted week by week, and suddenly the protest that had started over authoritarianism absorbed something much heavier, a war that millions of Americans never asked for and still don't understand. We've got to remember, I lived through Vietnam. I watched Iraq tear this country apart. And I can tell you from hard experience, when a government loses the trust of its people on matters of life and death, on war, and on the safety of citizens in their own neighborhoods, that trust does not come back easily. And that is the soil from which yesterday's 9 million grew. Now let me walk through what actually happened yesterday, because the details matter. And I want to be precise, because when you're dealing with something of this scale, precision is a form of respect. Respect for the people who showed up, and respect for you trying to make sense of it. More than 3,300 organized events, all 50 states, every single one. Estimated 8 to 9 million participants. That's roughly 2.5% of the entire American population in one day on their feet. In New York City, organizers counted more than 350,000. The NYPD, and this is remarkable, reported 0 protest-related arrests. 0. In Chicago, 200,000. In Boston, 180,000. Double what organizers expected. 100,000 in St. Paul, where Bernie Springsteen and Bernie Sanders spoke on the same stage. 90 to 100,000 in Seattle. Over 40,000 in San Diego. 8,000 in Salt Lake City, Utah. Not exactly a liberal stronghold. And here's the part that I think deserves special attention. Organizers said 2/3 of the RSVPs came from outside major urban centers. We're talking about conservative counties in Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, swing states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona. This was not a coastal phenomenon. This reached into the heart of the country. The issues people named were specific: ICE enforcement tactics and the shooting deaths of American citizens, the war in Iran, the DHS shutdown, now over 40 days and counting, cuts to medical research at the NIH, and soaring gas prices tied to the conflict. There was even a dedicated rally outside NIH headquarters in Bethesda, Maryland, with signs reading, "No kings, just vaccines." And the White House response? Spokesperson Abigail Jackson called them, and I'm quoting directly, "Trump derangement therapy sessions." The president himself, back in October, called the protests a joke, and the demonstrators very small, very ineffective, and whacked out. He then posted an AI-generated video of himself wearing a crown and flying a fighter jet labeled King Trump. And we'll come back to why that matters, because it matters a great deal. Now, this is where I need to shift from describing what happened to asking why it happened. Because 9 million people don't walk out of their homes for no reason. They don't take off work, find childcare, drive to a town square or a state capitol because they're bored. Something drove them there. And I believe it was a series of leadership decisions, specific identifiable choices that accumulated until people felt they had no other option but to be heard. Let me tell you something from my own experience. When I was in the White House, we had protesters outside regularly on health care, on Bosnia, on all kinds of things. And I didn't always agree with them. But here's what I understood, and what every president has a duty to understand. When your citizens are in the streets, your first job is to listen, not to mock, not to dismiss, to listen. The aggressive ICE operations that led to the deaths of Renee Good, Alex Priddy, and Keith Porter, American citizens killed in encounters with their own government. That is not a policy disagreement. That is a governance failure of the most serious kind. When federal agents take the lives of the people they're sworn to protect, and the administration's first instinct is to justify it rather than investigate it, you have lost something that is very hard to get back. Then there's the war. Operation Epic Fury, launched on February 28th during nuclear negotiations. Over 1,000 targets hit in 24 hours. The assassination of Iran's supreme leader. The administration's stated rationale has shifted week by week. Now look, I understand the complexities of Iran. I dealt with them for 8 years. But when you launch a surprise attack during diplomacy, you have told the world that America's word at the negotiating table means nothing. And the American people are watching their gas prices surge, watching their government shut down the Department of Homeland Security for over 40 days, and watching a war they never voted for expand. And the response from leadership is to call their concerns a joke. That's not strength. That's not conviction. That is the failure to meet the moment. And in my experience, when leaders fail to meet the moment finds its own voice. And yesterday it did. Now I want to go deeper, because what concerns me most isn't just what happened yesterday. It's what it tells us about what's happening underneath, to the institutions, to the fabric. When I was president, I used to say that the presidency is a custodial office. You don't own it, you hold it in trust. And part of that trust is maintaining the health of the institutions that make self-government possible. The courts, the agencies, the legislative process, the relationship between a government and its people. When that relationship breaks down, it doesn't break all at once. It erodes. One dismissed grievance at a time. One unanswered question at a time. One mocked protest at a time. And here's the honest truth. When a government responds to the largest single-day protest in its nation's history by calling it a therapy session, that is not just bad politics. It is an act of institutional damage. Because it tells millions of citizens that their voice, the very voice the First Amendment was designed to protect, doesn't register. And when people believe their voice doesn't register through normal channels, they don't just go home and accept it. They look for other channels. And some of those channels are healthy: voter registration, running for office, organizing, but some are not. I think about the Oklahoma City bombing. I think about the months and years of institutional distrust that preceded it. I'm not drawing an equivalence. I want to be clear about that. But I am saying that institutional trust is cumulative, and so is institutional damage. Each dismissed grievance makes the next protest larger, but it also makes compromise harder. It makes the middle ground narrower. And in a democracy, the middle ground is where governing happens. Now, I also want to say something that might not be popular with everyone on my side of the aisle. Protests alone are not enough. Marching is a beginning, not an end. It expresses a grievance, but it doesn't write a law. It doesn't fund a program. It doesn't win an election. And if this movement is going to matter 6 months from now, it has to translate into something more durable than signs and chants. It has to translate into democratic power, the kind you exercise at the ballot box, in the committee room, on the school board. Otherwise, the energy fades and the institutions keep eroding. And that's where things start to get really complicated. Now look, I'm going to say something here that may make both sides a little uncomfortable. And that's usually a sign you're being honest. Let me start with the administration. Dismissing 9 million Americans as irrelevant is not just callous, it is politically reckless. I've been in politics long enough to know that when you refuse to engage with the grievances of that many people, you don't make the problem smaller, you make it bigger, you give it oxygen. The Iran war, launched without a clear exit strategy and during active negotiations, echoes the worst strategic mistakes of the last half-century. And an immigration crackdown that results in the deaths of American citizens on American soil, that is a failure by any standard, conservative or liberal. You cannot claim to be the party of law and order when your enforcement apparatus is killing the people it's supposed to protect. But now let me turn to the movement itself, because I believe in being honest with people I agree with, not just people I don't. The No King slogan is powerful. It resonates. It captures something real about how millions of people feel. But governing requires more than a slogan. Governing requires yes answers, not just no. And I genuinely worry, that this movement could fall into the same trap that progressive coalitions have fallen into before, becoming purely oppositional, defined by what it's against rather than what it's for. When I ran for president in 1992, I didn't just run against George H.W. Bush. I ran for something: economic opportunity, fiscal responsibility, a bridge to the 21st century. I told people what I would do, not just what I wouldn't tolerate. And that's what won. Not anger alone, but anger channeled into an affirmative vision. I'd also caution the movement against purity politics. You're not going to agree on everything. The person standing next to you at a rally in Phoenix may have very different views from the person in Portland. That's fine. That's America. But if you start demanding ideological perfection, you lose the moderate voters who decide elections. And make no mistake, elections are where this gets decided, not in the streets, in the voting booth. Now, where does this go? Because that's really the question, isn't it? 9 million people made a statement yesterday, but a statement is just the beginning. And I see three possible roads ahead. Road one, and this is the best case. The energy sustains, it organizes, and it translates into a genuine political force that reshapes the 2026 midterm elections. We've seen this before. The Tea Party did it in 2010. They turned grassroots anger into legislative power. The civil rights movement did it across decades. Sustained, disciplined, strategically brilliant. If this movement can register voters at the scale it registered protesters, if it can recruit candidates in swing districts, if it can maintain discipline and stay focused on the issues that brought 8 to 9 million people out, the war, the immigration deaths, the government shutdown, the NIH cuts, then it could be historically significant. The midterms are 8 months away. That's enough time, but only if the work starts now. Road two, the cautionary tale. The energy dissipates. The coalition fragments. The anti-war wing pulls one direction. The immigration-focused wing pulls another. The progressive purists demand something the moderates can't deliver, and the whole thing fractures. We've seen this too. The anti-Vietnam movement splintered. Occupy Wall Street burned bright and faded. The Women's March in 2017 was historic, and within 2 years, the organization was mired in internal conflict. If this movement follows that path, the administration outlasts it, and the protests become a footnote rather than a turning point. Road three, and this is the one that keeps me up at night: escalation on both sides. The government cracks down on protest movements. Protesters radicalize. We already saw arrest in Los Angeles yesterday, a protester dressed as the Statue of Liberty taken into custody. We saw clashes in Dallas. If the White House continues to dismiss and provoke, and if elements of the movement respond with confrontation rather than discipline, we could enter a cycle that damages the republic itself. And let me be very clear, that is a road nobody wins on. Which road we take depends on leadership, from the White House, from Congress, from organizers, and from ordinary citizens who decide whether to stay engaged after the signs come down. Energy without strategy is just noise. But energy with strategy, that's how you change a country. You know, I've been around a long time. I've seen Selma on television as a young man. I watched Watergate unfold and what it did to this country's faith in its own government. I was there when the Berlin Wall fell and freedom swept across a continent. I stood in the Oval Office on the morning of September 11th and felt the weight of what it means to lead a nation in crisis. I went through my own impeachment, and now I'm watching 9 million Americans stand in the streets of their own country and say, this is not what we agreed to. And here's what I still believe after all of it. The right to protest is sacred. It is the beating heart of the First Amendment. And 9 million Americans exercising that right peacefully, overwhelmingly peacefully, is not a threat to democracy. It is democracy. It is the system working exactly as the founders intended. They didn't create a republic so that citizens would sit quietly while their government made decisions they found intolerable. They created a republic so that citizens could speak, could organize, could demand accountability, and then go to the ballot box and enforce it. But I also believe that democracy requires more than marching. It requires voting. It requires running for office, not just for president, but for city council, for school board, for county commissioner. It requires building coalitions with people you don't fully agree with. It requires the unglamorous, grinding, frustrating work of governance, the hearings, the negotiations, the compromises that nobody puts on a sign, but that actually change people's lives. I don't agree with everything every protester said yesterday. I don't agree with every word on every sign. But in a healthy democracy, I don't have to. That's the whole point. The strength of this country has never been that we all think alike. It's that we have a system, imperfect, fragile, often infuriating, that lets us disagree and still govern together. We've been through worse. We have. And we've come out better. But only when we did the work. Not just the marching, the work, the registering, the organizing, the showing up in November, the holding people accountable, not with slogans, but with votes. That's what I'm asking. That's what this moment demands. And I still believe, I truly do, that the American people are capable of it. We always have been, even in the darkest moments, especially in the darkest moments.